Today we are going to be learning about ethical standards in psychology. The first thing that we have to define is ethics. Ethics are methods of conduct or standards for proper and responsible behavior. As you know, the study of ethics is very important, so important that we have a class at Pine Lake, but it is especially important in the study of psychology as well. So, psychology has a series of ethical principles that were published by the American Psychological Association. Those were published in 1992, and since then they have added amendments. So the most recent amendments were added in 2010. These are very long list of ethical guidelines, and today we're just covering a few of the highlights. So you might be wondering, why do we need ethical standards? Ethical standards are in place to make sure that no physical or psychological harm comes to the participants in psychological studies. So everything goes back to that question. How can we protect the participants from physical and psychological harm? So in order to get research approved, all proposals have to be taken to these ethics committees, also known as institutional review boards or IRBs. And what happens is these group of people are going to look over the research proposal, and this is all going to take place before the research begins, just to make sure that the study is ethical. So these IRBs can either approve the research, disapprove, or require modifications in the research study. And then once approval is obtained, research can begin. So approval has to be obtained first before research can begin. And most of those IRBs are in university settings just because a lot of research takes place in universities. All right, so next we're going to go over some of the common ethical guidelines. The first relates to the risk-benefit ratio. So it has to be determined if the rights and what are the rights and well-being of participants weighted against the study's value to science. So in other words, people and their rights are going to come first over research. One kind of funny story that I have related to this is there was a high school teacher who assigned a project where the students were expected to interview an elderly member of the community about end of life. And so the interviewer was asking this elderly person a series of questions, and it caused the elderly person so much distress thinking about the end of life that they were unable to continue. So in that case, the well-being, their psychological well-being, didn't it wasn't worth asking the questions of them because it caused them so much distress. And also, when we're thinking about risks, as in physical or psychological risks, they have to be similar to what a person experiences in everyday life. And so the participant shouldn't be exposed to any risks that are greater or additional to those that they have in normal everyday life. Next, we have informed consent. We've all signed these before. It's forms in which the researchers are going to describe the procedures, the risks, the purpose of the experiment, the benefits of the research, the length of time the person has to participate, emergency contact, things like that. And even if it is a child or an infant participating in research, then their parents have to be informed and give their consent. Next, what we're going to see is that psychological research occasionally involves deception. But in order for the research to involve deception, the deception has to be justified. So what does this mean, deception? Deception is when researchers withhold information or intentionally misinform participants. So a quick example of that is an experiment we'll talk about later this year called the Milgram experiment, in which the participants believed they were administering a series of shocks to other participants in the study when in reality they weren't actually administering shocks, but they believed they were. So they were deceived to think that they had been administering shocks. But in order for deception to occur, it must be as little as possible and it must not cause the participant distress. Now you might be wondering, why do we need to deceive people in research? Sometimes it's necessary to avoid participants thinking that they know what the researcher is looking for. And we'll get into this next week when we look at problems in research. But after the study, if deception did take place, then participants have to be debriefed, which is going to be one of our later points. So, another ethical guideline. So, investigator has to debrief the participants. You might be wondering what this means. The participants have to be told what the researchers were looking for and why. They have to know what part they played in the experiment. If they were deceived in the experiment, then they have to be told that they were deceived and then told why they were deceived. And then the participants have the opportunity to ask any questions of the researchers at all, and the researchers are expected to answer honestly and openly. Next, the participants have the right to withdraw from the study at any time. So whether maybe it's causing them too much distress, or maybe they're bored, or maybe they don't have time for the study, those are all examples of reasons why people might withdraw. And people also have the opportunity to withdraw after the study, so they can withdraw the data that their participation provided. Next, in reference to the data has to remain confidential. And so let's say an individual case study was performed, then they would use false names. But more commonly than not, they actually report group results so that one individual can't be identified. Alright, so we learned in our definition of psychology that psychology is the study of behavior and mental processes, and we learned that psychology studies humans as well as animals. And so in studying animals, we have to also consider why does psychology need to study animals, but then also look at what are ethical guidelines in place to protect animal participants. So the question we're going to look at is, why is it beneficial to study animals? So one is because animals have shorter lifespans than humans, it's easier to look at the long-term effects of, let's say, medication, diseases, things like that. Also, it's a lot easier to control variables related to animals. So researchers can easily control what these animals eat, where they're living. They can clone them and things like that. Or excuse me, so modify the genetics to determine how related the animals are to each other and things like that. And also, because animals lead much simpler lifestyles and do a lot less complex behaviors, it's a lot easier to see the effects of the variables that the researchers are manipulating. Whereas for us as humans, there are a lot of external factors that could have played a role as opposed to just the one variable that was manipulated. Next, animals are used in ways that people can never be used. So experiments that can be performed on animals, it would be unethical to perform on humans. And with animal research, it has enabled us to develop vaccines. Another specific example is insulin treatment for diabetes, and learning about how to perform transplants. And in general, the use of animals in research is widely debated. It's very complex, but researchers continue to use animals because they believe that the benefits to humans outweigh the hazards to which the animals are exposed. So what are the ethical standards that protect the study of animals? So what we're going to see is the underlying ethical guideline in studying animals is that they would avoid exposing animals to unnecessary pain or suffering. So, for example, if some type of surgery is necessary, then it has to be done under anesthesia for an animal. Also, if, let's say, they had to study the effects of a drug on an animal and they knew that it was going to kill the animal, then it has to be done in a humane way. So that is all in our study of the ethics of animals. Tomorrow we're going to be looking at some different scenarios and you're going to be deciding if they do meet these ethical criteria or not.